Whenever the nation lost a leader, whether through illness or assassination, the vice president seamlessly assumed the full mantle and responsibilities of the presidency. However, the Tyler precedent was still technically a historical and political convention rather than a codified amendment. The ambiguities that plagued Washington in 1841 were only entirely resolved in 1967. Following the tragic assassination of President John F. Kennedy, the country recognized the need for a foolproof system of succession. This realization culminated in the ratification of the 25th Amendment. Section 1 of the 25th Amendment formally codified the Tyler precedent into law. It dictates that in case of the removal, death, or resignation of the president, the vice president shall become president. Furthermore, the amendment established clear protocols for handling presidential inability, ensuring that the modern world will never face a chaotic succession crisis like the one that occurred in 1841. Therefore, William Henry Harrison's 31 days must be reframed. Rather than being written off as a historical footnote or a tragic blunder, Harrison's term is the crucial starting point of modern presidential stability. The shortest presidency in American history ironically provided the most durable blueprint for the survival of the executive office. Harrison's legacy is woven into the very fabric of the continuity of American government, proving that profound historical shifts can stem from the briefest of tenures. Tyler's bold move became known as the Tyler precedent. He firmly put his foot down when the cabinet attempted to limit his voting power, declaring outright, "I can never consent to being dictated to. I will be president myself." This decisive action was not without profound legislative battles. Many members of Congress, including Henry Clay, vehemently argued that Tyler was merely an acting vice president. Some even threatened to impeach him if he continued to exercise full executive powers. Tyler held his ground. He sent a clear message to Congress. Either he was the president with the full weight of executive authority, or he was nothing at all. Ultimately, his persistence and refusal to back down forced Congress to acknowledge his position. By consolidating his power and rejecting the notion of a puppet administration, Tyler established a legal interpretation of succession that ensured continuity and prevented constitutional collapse. His decisive action turned a potential moment of national weakness into a permanent framework for American political stability. The lasting legacy of the shortest term, the legacy of William Henry Harrison's 31 days in office, cannot be overstated. While Harrison himself never signed a major piece of legislation or appointed a Supreme Court justice, his sudden death initiated the most significant stress test the American constitutional system had ever faced. The turmoil of 1841 illuminated a glaring vulnerability in the design of the Republic, a vulnerability that required a robust, modern constitutional remedy. Harrison's death served as the high-stakes catalyst that eventually defined the constitutional boundaries of executive authority. For over a century, the Tyler precedent held the nation together, guiding the country through the deaths of 8 other presidents in office. The framers had established the rule that the powers and duties of the presidency would devolve on the vice president, but they had deliberately left the exact mechanics vague. Crucially, the Constitution failed to specify whether the vice president actually became the president or if he merely served as an acting placeholder. Would he serve out the remainder of the 4-year term, or would he merely hold the fort until a special election could be organized? Because Harrison was the first president to die in office, this was an untested theoretical question. The ensuing chaos was immediate. Vice President John Tyler was at his home in Williamsburg, Virginia, when he received word of the president's death. He made an emergency carriage ride to the Capitol, arriving to find a deeply divided and hostile cabinet. Members of Harrison's cabinet, viewing Tyler as a subordinate or a caretaker, suggested that he was simply the vice president acting as president. They initially planned to make administration policy by a vote, with Tyler acting as little more than a chairman with limited authority. This historical uncertainty directly mirrors modern concerns about the continuity of government. In the 2020s, with advanced weapon systems and the ever-present potential for sudden leadership transitions, clarity in the chain of command is paramount. The chaos of 1841 serves as a stark reminder of what happens when constitutional processes are ambiguous in the face of sudden tragedy. The Tyler precedent and the executive shift. John Tyler refused to accept a diminished, subordinate role. Recognizing that the survival of the executive branch's authority was on the line, he forcefully asserted himself as the rightful president of the United States. He took the presidential oath of office, fully claiming the title, the salary, and all the sweeping powers of the presidency, despite fierce opposition from the congressional establishment. Instead, it set the stage for immediate political exhaustion and severe physical decline. 31 days of executive friction. Harrison's time in the executive mansion was defined by intense executive friction from the very first hour. Before he had even taken the oath of office, the president-elect was bogged down in a bitter power struggle. Powerful Whig leaders, most notably Senator Henry Clay, believed that they, not the president, would control the direction of the federal government. Clay sought to dominate the administration, expecting Harrison to act as a figurehead while the legislature dictated appointments and policy. Harrison, however, was a stubborn military leader with his own vision of executive authority. He fiercely resisted Clay's heavy-handed demands, refusing to be reduced to a puppet for the congressional Whigs. This constant political combat took a heavy toll on the president. Simultaneously, the grueling schedule of political patronage, combined with the drafty, unsanitary conditions of the White House in the 1840s, led to a rapid and terminal physical decline. Within weeks of his inauguration, Harrison's minor head cold evolved into a full-blown, life-threatening medical crisis. In 1841, medical knowledge was rudimentary at best, and the treatments administered by his physicians, including bloodletting and the application of heated suction cups, only accelerated his demise. As the president slipped closer to death, an atmosphere of absolute panic swept through Washington. The realization hit the young nation with terrifying force. The United States was facing its first-ever presidential death in office, and no one knew what to do next. The constitutional void when William Henry Harrison breathed his last on April 4, 1841, just 1 month into his term, the young republic was plunged into a state of acute crisis. The source of this crisis was the terrifying ambiguity of Article 2, Section 1, Clause 6 of the U.S. Constitution. William Henry Harrison, the president who changed history. In only 31 days, we rewrite the narrative of failure by examining how William Henry Harrison's brief 31 days triggered a permanent constitutional transformation. We dissect the chaotic transition of power and the precedent-setting crisis of succession that followed his sudden death, proving that his shortest tenure fundamentally redefined the executive office for every future leader. The fragile triumph of 1841, the election of 1840, was a watershed moment in American political history. William Henry Harrison, the seasoned military hero of the War of 1812, famously known as Old Tippecanoe, secured a landslide victory for the burgeoning Whig Party. The campaign was a massive spectacle, a pioneering venture into grassroots political theater that introduced the famous log cabin and hard cider imagery. Facing economic depression, the Whigs needed a populist figurehead. They cast Harrison as a humble man of the people, despite his actual aristocratic Virginia origins. Yet, this fragile triumph immediately bled into exhaustion. Behind the carnival atmosphere of the campaign lay a fractured, chaotic political coalition, and Harrison faced the monumental task of balancing the demands of party power brokers and a deeply divided nation. On March 4, 1841, a bitter, freezing rain swept through Washington, D.C. Disregarding the warnings of his inner circle, the 68-year-old Harrison, the oldest man to be elected to the presidency at that time, stepped to the podium without an overcoat, hat, or gloves. What followed was a fatal mistake of record-breaking proportions. Harrison delivered the longest inaugural address in American history. At 8,445 words, The speech took nearly 2 hours to deliver in the freezing, biting cold. He intended the speech to be a demonstration of his physical and political stamina, a testament to his rugged outdoorsman persona.